welcome everyone. I'll start by saying that I pretty much hate Zoom meetings. It's very difficult to engage with people over Zoom meetings, so I wish we were there in person, but we're going to do the best we can because that's what's available to us right now. And I thank the Palouse Conservation District for asking me to talk about using the native plants. They have a big plant sale, and a lot of these plants are available for their at their plant sale, and we also have these plants. I know that the plant sale is running low, and I will be honest, we are running low on inventory this year. It's been a crazy year. While people have been home quarantined with COVID, they've also been shopping for plants and working in their garden, which is a great way to social distance. But we'll go ahead and start with the presentation here. For those of you who aren't familiar with Plants of the Wild, we are a native plant nursery located just outside of Tico, Washington, which is about halfway between Spokane and Pullman. We have 6 3,000 square foot greenhouses, 3 3,000 square foot shade houses, and about 3 acres of container yard, 1 to 5 gallon containers. So we're a subsidiary of a big seed company called Seeds Incorporated, which does turf grasses and pasture grasses and native grasses. And so we all work together out here in the middle of the Palouse. This is a picture of one of our greenhouses. We do grow a very diverse palette of plants. When I first started almost 34 years ago, we grew about 50 different species. Now we grow a plant palette of about 350 different species. Just because of the demands of the industry have been changing. We do a lot more grasses and forbs now than we used to, along with the trees and shrubs. I will say that sagebrush is probably our largest crop. We do a lot of sagebrush for restoration projects. Most of our plants go to large restoration projects, either with the Forest Service. We work with Department of Transportation. We work with organizations like the Palouse Conservation District, and all of the plants go out to either fix land that has been harmed or to improve wildlife habitat and erosion control, weed control. But one of the fastest growing parts of our business has been in the retail and landscape industry. And about 20 years ago was kind of the first surge of landscaping with native plants. And there were a lot of failures there because people didn't understand what landscaping with native plants was. It was just kind of a buzzword, cool thing to do, but nobody did their research. And so we had a lot of failures. I came up with a couple of different basically definitions of some things that I think are important. One of them is native landscaping, and I'm telling you that this is the native, or refers to the design, construction, and maintenance of landscapes that use native or indigenous plants. And then there's also naturalized landscaping, and that refers to the design, construction, and maintenance of landscapes that use native or indigenous plants and non-native plants in a way that mimics nature with a goal of achieving sustainability. And so we have a lot of customers that want to do strictly natives and stay with native landscaping. And then we have a lot of customers that want to recreate a picture in their head of a place that they go camping or something like that. And maybe using all native plants isn't the way to recreate that if you've got a smaller backyard. But the key to having a low maintenance, sustainable landscape that uses native plants is knowing about those plants and putting the right plant in the right place. If you put something that likes full sun and a well-drained soil in your backyard, and it may grow outside of your backyard, but if you put it in a place where it has poor drainage and is up against a fence where it's in the shade, it probably won't do well and won't be low maintenance. So you have to consider with home landscaping, consider that microclimate that you're putting those plants into. instead of it's just native to Pullman. So we're going to start with some ground covers. The first one I'm going to talk about is Kanikanik, and it's actually a very popular landscape plant. There are several cultivars that are available. I would say that probably the native variety is the most hardy. Some of the other cultivars are just a little less hardy, but they are all pretty tough. It's evergreen, a real pretty ground cover with leathery teardrop shaped leaves. Has pink flowers and red berries. And one thing that's nice is it is evergreen, so it stays green or actually turns kind of this bronze color in the winter, and really pretty in the landscape, really pretty with frost on it. So it adds year-round interest. This one does like to have a well-drained soil. It doesn't like to have its feet wet. So you don't want to put it in a low area that doesn't drain, or you'll get root rot problems and it won't do well. It does well on slopes where the water drains away, or in sandy soils that drain well. Wild ginger. This is one that actually does well in kind of those moister, more organic soils. It likes shade. It likes kind of that organic understory soil. Very pretty landscape plant. Has heart-shaped leaves, and if it's really happy and healthy, these leaves will be 6 inches across, and it'll just kind of take over an area. It will grow in full sun, although that's not its favorite, and sometimes it'll get a little leaf burn. It prefers partial sun or even into full shade. And it has these really pretty, almost prehistoric looking flowers that are very interesting. It isn't an edible ginger root, but the reason it gets its name is when you crush the leaves, it does have a ginger smell to it. Western Clematis. This is one that's been very popular. You have to be careful on this one. It is very aggressive. It is a native clematis that grows in very dry sites, full sun. It does provide good cover for wildlife. And one of the reasons that is it keeps its leaves, even in the winter and the fall. The leaves will die back, but they won't fall off of the vine. And so groups like Pheasants Forever will actually put pallets out and have this grow over the pallets, and it provides good winter cover, even though it is not an evergreen. But it is one that you have to kind of watch because it will crawl up anything. This is a picture of it actually, it's 2 different pictures. The one up here is a picture of it in my dad's yard, and he had it growing over a big old rotted log. And so it was perfect. It crawled over that. It has the little white flowers, and then actually the seed heads are very interesting, a very fuzzy seed head. This was actually on our back deck. We had it growing on the back of a pond, and these are the little fence runners that they were growing up. It doesn't have tendrils. It will crawl up itself, but you have to get it started to crawl up things. A lot of people use this like to crawl up chain link fences, or to use as kind of a screen to cover things. Bunchberry is a nice ground cover. It's a dogwood ground cover and has the actual traditional dogwood flowers really beautiful on it. This one again likes this more of the acidic soil and the shade, and has these beautiful white flowers. And then it's considered a semi-evergreen. It does turn the red in the winter. And this is actually a picture of it mixed with some fringe sage, very pretty. Has red berries after the white flowers. Wild strawberry. This is one that's really adaptable to quite a few different situations, soil types and moisture. It will take partial shade, it'll take full sun. It can be aggressive and crawl into things if it gets too much water, but it really is nice. It has good winter color, kind of a bronzy red color on the leaves, the white flowers. It does have edible berries. The berries are small. They're like the size of a fingertip, so it takes a lot of berries to make a strawberry pie, but they are edible and they're tasty and the birds love them. This is a picture of the berry and also that fall color that's really pretty. Creeping Oregon grape. This is one that's extremely adaptable. This is one that if people call me and say, I can't get anything to grow in this area, I usually recommend trying Creeping Oregon grape because it will grow pretty much anywhere. It isn't particular about soil types or soil condition. It will take moisture. It is pretty drought tolerant. The wildlife, the birds love the berries, but the deer don't really eat that, or eat the leaves. So that's an attractive trait too. It's real similar to the tall Oregon grape that you see a lot in the landscape, but this one only gets about a foot tall at the max. And it has the yellow flowers and the purple berries. Again, the berries are edible. These berries are really tart. You need to add some sugar to make them into good jelly, but they do make good jelly. Low green rabbit brush. This is a real drought tolerant one. It does need a real well-drained soil, and in our area, you really can't water it at all or you'll have root rot problems. But this is a picture of it actually down in a landscape in Lewiston, and it's a drought tolerant landscape, low growing. One thing that's nice is it's fall flowering, so it has yellow flowers in the fall, great pollinator species. And one of the problems that we have around here is we don't have a lot of fall flowering pollinators. So that makes it a great addition to the landscape. And then sagebrush. This is one that's tough to grow around here. We have a lot of people that try to grow it in their landscape. We get a lot of winter moisture here, and that's usually when you have problems with it. In the summer, it does well, but in the winter, you can't really keep it dry enough to make it through the winter, so that's a challenge. You do need a very well-drained soil, and we've had some luck with, even if it's like kind of under a overhang where it doesn't get all of that winter moisture, it does better. But a lot of people like it. It is real attractive in the landscape if it does get a little bit of water. And a lot of people, it is one of those things that takes them back to camping experiences or if they grew up with the sagebrush area. Common snowberry. This is one that a lot of people will see out in nature and think, I really don't want that in my landscape. It has kind of a stemmy growth, especially if it's not in full sun and just a few leaves at the ends of those stems. But if you do have it in a landscape where it gets a little more sun, it will stay a lot fuller. One thing that you have to be careful on this is if you do give it water or it's able to get water, it will sucker and spread. The drier you keep it, the less it suckers. And a lot of the native plants are like that. They're used to growing in our area without additional water. And if you give them additional water, the first thing they do is they thrive and they look really attractive. The second thing they do is they take over your yard. And that was one of the things that we had real problems with on that first surge of native landscaping is everybody wanted to do low water use landscape, but they kept their irrigation systems on. And so those native plants took over their yard. So if you do want to use low water landscape, make sure that you turn that irrigation back. Thimbleberry, this is one of my favorites. It has a really nice texture in the landscape. This one does like a partial shaded area. It will grow in full sun, but sometimes you'll get kind of a yellow leaf burn on it. It's got these big maple-like leaves, really pretty bright green with white flowers and then a raspberry type fruit. The fruit is edible. It is very soft. Raspberries are soft, but the thimbleberries are even softer. It's pretty much one that you just pick and put in your mouth and enjoy right then. It's hard to put it in a container and keep it, but they are tasty. And the birds love those. Golden currant. This is another one that's edible, and the berries are very tasty. This one gets about 4 to 6 foot, has really pretty yellow flowers early in the spring. I love this one because it's one of the first things that has leaves in the spring. Mine behind my window here is starting to leaf out already. And so it's kind of that first sign of spring. And then the leaves or the flowers follow right after that. The picture of the berries is berries that are not ripe yet. They're very tasty when they turn black. Unless you net them, it's very hard to keep them that way because the birds absolutely love them and they will eat them before they become ripe. But when they do get to that black color, they're very tasty. I love to mix them with rhubarb and make a rhubarb currant pie. Red flowering currant. This is another one that gets about 4 to 6 foot. This one will take partial shade. It likes a little bit more moisture, although we have it on our bank and we don't irrigate anything, and it does very well. Great pollinator species, beautiful. This is actually a picture on our bank. All of these plants get absolutely no water. We do not irrigate our bank, and we've got the Oregon grape, golden currant, red flowering currant, red osier dogwood, and we give them no additional water. And they do very well. Ocean spray. This is one that is nice because it has a little bit of different form in the landscape. A lot of the native shrubs are more of a rounded form. This one's more upright and narrow. So it's kind of nice to have that different form in the landscape. It has these white clusters of flowers. That's why it's called ocean spray. It kind of looks like ocean spray. Beautiful in flower. Grows in very harsh sites. It's very adaptable to poor soils, drought tolerant. It also keeps its seed heads into the winter. Some people like that and some people don't. You can prune it off if you don't like it. We kind of like it. This is a picture of one that's out in front of our office, and we kind of like the look that it gives in the landscape in the winter. The birds also come back. The seeds aren't prized by the birds, but when all the other seed is gone, they come back to these in the winter and eat that seed. So we like it for winter bird food. Mock orange or syringa. This is the Idaho state flower. It's about a 6 foot shrub with very beautiful white fragrant flowers. Very, very fragrant, strong fragrance with these. One of the problems with this one is the more you know about raising plants, probably the more you try to kill this one because it kind of looks like it's always water stressed a little bit. The leaves just naturally kind of have that appearance. And so people tend to water them more and more. And it does not like water. It likes to be dry. It will grow on very poor sites with the dry soils. And so people usually water them and eventually kill them. So even though it does look like it might need a little water, just let it go and you'll enjoy these beautiful flowers. Red osier dogwood. This is one that can get big. It says a 6 to 12 foot shrub. We have it in our yard on no water, and it's probably about a 6 to 12 foot shrub. I've seen it 25 feet tall if it's in a wet area. So you do have to be careful on this. This is one where sometimes getting a cultivar is a better idea if you're doing a small area in your backyard. There are some dwarf varieties of the red osier dogwood that'll give you the nice look of that, but they won't get as large. That you can prune the dogwood, you can prune it hard and it responds well to that. It just kind of depends on how much pruning you want to do and how low maintenance you want your landscape to be. It doesn't have the typical dogwood flowers. It has clusters of these little white flowers that are followed by the white berries. And then it has the really pretty bright red twigs, which are nice in the winter. Mallow 9 bark. This is about a 6-foot shrub with real pretty white pom-pom-like flowers. This is one that tolerates real poor soils. It'll take partial shade or full sun. It does need a little moisture to look real nice in the landscape. If it doesn't have any moisture, sometimes it'll look a little raggy. One thing that you need to understand is one of the reasons it's called 9 bark is it has this peeling bark, and you'll see just strips of the bark peeling off. And a lot of people think that that's the plant dying, because on most plants that would be a bad sign. But on this plant, it's perfectly normal for the strips of bark to peel off like that. Oak leaf sumac. This is one that gets about 4 to 6 foot tall. It has little yellow flowers. They're not real showy, kind of inconspicuous. Very drought tolerant. A lot of people use this as a fire break plant because pretty much no matter how dry it gets, it still stays this nice bright green color. It also has a nice fall color, kind of yellows and oranges to red. So it is nice in the landscape. The other thing is some of the sumacs have such a problem with suckering, and they'll spread and take over. And this one does not sucker like the other sumacs do. Woods rose. This is one of the native roses. There's 2 main pink native roses that you see around this area. The woods rose is the one that usually grows more upright and in harsher sites. Nootka rose gets a little taller and kind of weeps over, and you usually see it growing in kind of moister sites or even some partial shade. This one's a great one for wildlife cover and food. The birds like to hide in it, and they also hold their rose hips. And so those rose hips, again, are not the first thing that the birds go to. They usually like to get the berries first, but then back in the fall and into the winter, they love to come back and get these rose hips. This is one that you have to keep dry or it will sucker in your landscape too. My dad had 2 of these, one in the front landscape that didn't get any water, and it stayed about 3 to 4 feet tall and stayed really nice and under control. And then he had another one in the backyard that was next to our hot tub. And he had a tendency to forget the hose on in the hot tub, and it overflowed and watered that rose. So that one was like 6 to 8 feet tall and was taking over the yard. So it was definitely a big difference on how you treat that. Serviceberry, this is probably one of our most popular natives in the landscape. It gets about 6 to 12 feet tall. If you see it in the landscape, a lot of times you'll see it kind of, the leaves are kind of sparse, but actually, if you give it just a little bit of care and a little bit of love in your landscape, it will fill in a lot, and you'll get that the leaves will become fuller, and it'll make a nice landscape shrub. This is one of the first things that flowers around here. We kind of have flushes of white in this area. And so the first flush of white is the serviceberry. And then you'll have a flush of white, which is the chokecherry. And then you'll get your mock orange and ocean spray. So you just kind of have these white flushes on the hillsides. Serviceberry is definitely the first one, very early with these strap-like petals. And then it does have edible berries. The berries are not real flavorful, but what I like to do is mix them with my huckleberries, and it makes the huckleberries go further, and the huckleberries will add some flavor with the serviceberry. Water birch. This is a real attractive tree, and a lot of people like the birch because of the small leaves, and they have a really nice texture in the landscape. The water birch has this really nice bronze bark. One thing that we have to worry about in this area, though, is birch borer. Birch borer has moved in, and we see a lot of trees that are affected by it. Some people say that the native trees are less susceptible to birch borer or even resistant to birch borer, and that's not really true. But one fact is that the birch borer does attack stressed trees. And so the native birches are a little hardier than some of the European birches. And so they probably are a little more resistant to stress and therefore maybe have some less susceptible to the birch borer, but it is something that you have to watch out for. Paper birch is our other native birch. It gets bigger than the water birch, 40 foot plus, and has the nice white bark. So it's a real one, or one that's really attractive in the landscape too. Also, both of them have very nice fall color. One of the things that we suggest, if you want that birch type look, but you don't want to take the risk of having birch borer attack your trees, are the alders. And they're similar in growth, multi-stemmed. Most of them, the Sitka alder is about 30 foot if it's in a wetter area, or in drier areas, it'll stay smaller than that. It gives you similar to the look of the birch. You got that multi-stemmed. It doesn't have the small leaves and had quite the fine texture as the birch, but it is attractive in the landscape and kind of gives you that same look without the disease or insect problems. Douglas hawthorn. This is one that grows in this area. You'll see it along a lot of the creeks and streams. It's one of the main reasons that everybody loves the Palouse for the fall color, because it has beautiful fall color in the fall. Great for wildlife cover and food. It has crabapple type fruit, and it has thorns that all of the little animals like to hide in these hawthorn shrubs to keep away from the predators. Probably not one that you want to put back if your grandchildren are playing in the backyard, because it's not little stickers, it's great big old thorns. But then again, maybe if you want to keep children out of your backyard, it might be a good one to choose. Rocky Mountain maple. This is a multi-stem tree. I love this one, has bright red twigs, really nice fall color. I say that it's a short-lived tree, which it really isn't a short-lived tree, but a lot of times you have dieback from the stems and you'll have branches that die back. So it requires a little bit of cleanup in the landscape. You just need to go in and prune out some of those branches as they die back, but then the new branches come in, have the really nice red twigs, and has beautiful fall color. Rocky Mountain juniper. This is one that's widely used for screens and hedges in this area. Extremely drought tolerant. It is somewhat susceptible to root rot, so you can't have it in a wet area. It doesn't like to have its feet wet. One of the things that kind of makes it nice in the landscape versus the arborvitaes that have been so popular in the past is it doesn't winter burn like the arborvitae does. It does a lot of times turn kind of a bronze color, but then it comes right out of it. And it also has the branches coming from the main stem instead of all the branches coming from the base. I'm sure you've all seen arborvitaes that have the snow on them that are all bent over and laying on the ground in the winter, or the ones that are tied up with burlap to protect them from winter burn and to keep them from bending over. But I don't think the burlap wrapped shrubs are very attractive in the landscape. That's just my personal opinion. Quaking aspen. This was probably the biggest disaster of the first wave of landscaping. Everybody wanted a fast growing tree for their yard and they wanted to use a native, so they planted an aspen in their yard. And the aspen is definitely not a specimen tree, a single tree. In fact, the largest living organism is an aspen tree. You have to be aware of what it likes to do. It naturally likes to sucker and spread, and that's what it does in nature. It also wants to do that in your yard. So a lot of nurseries planted or sold a bunch of these aspen. People put them in the middle of their yard, and then they started mowing off the suckers, and the suckers don't give up, and then you end up with these big knots in your yard, and it was just kind of a disaster. But everybody wants to go for this really pretty native aspen look. And some people have the ability. This is actually a house in Tico. And They planted these and gave them a space to spread and make a little grove. Their lawn and more of a formal landscape is up top, and it doesn't go into that because it's got an area to spread into. So it's going to leave them up alone up there because it's got this area that it can be natural in. Chokecherry, as we talked about before, this is kind of the second flush of white that we have. Flowers just behind the serviceberry. The flowers are a little different. They're long clusters of flowers, and then they're followed by these berries. Again, these berries are edible, and they actually become pretty tasty when they're black, totally ripe. But again, if you don't net them, the birds will probably eat them before they get to the point where they taste very good. They are tart, and a lot of people do grow the chokecherry and harvest the berries for jellies and jams and syrups. Blue elderberry. This is the hot one on the Palouse this year. We have sold more blue elderberry in the last few years than we ever have before. People are catching on. It's being used for edibles and also medicinal purposes. And it is a very hardy shrub, grows in tough conditions, drought conditions. This is another one that you might see in the landscape and not think you'd want it in your landscape, because a lot of times it has a real caney growth. And when you have it in the landscape and give it a little bit of care, it actually stays a lot fuller and makes a really nice shrub in the landscape. It also has these huge dinner plate size clusters of white flowers, and then that's followed by blueberries. And the berries are edible. A lot of people make juice and wine and jam and a lot of products from the elderberries. And then dwarf mountain ash. This is one that's a small tree, or kind of a multi-stemmed tree or large shrub. It's another one that has really nice year-round interest. It has bright green leaves, white flowers, kind of the orange to red berries on it, and it has a really nice fall color. It can be a little messy if you don't have enough birds to clean up the berries. It does drop the berries, and so you'll have them in your yard. If you have a lot of birds around, the birds usually will take care of them for you. This is one, though, that is a common problem, is that the berries stay on through the winter and ferment, and then the birds eat the berries and get a little drunk and fly into your windows. And that is the last slide I have. Again, we kind of talked just about the trees and shrubs. There's lots of different natives. I saw on some of your favorite plant lists, there were a lot of wildflowers and forbs. We do have a lot of Palouse wildflowers. We work with Thorn Creek natives down out of Moscow, and they have a remnant Palouse prairie that they've collected a bunch of the wildflowers and are growing them out, doing a great job. And then we've been growing plugs, and so that's been a really nice addition to what we have to offer, and our great landscape plants also.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kathy, for your presentation. That was wonderful. A lot of really good tips in there. Hopefully, as we were going through, you were able to follow along with the handout provided in the chat. We'll also have that available on our website, and it'll be coming to your inboxes after the talk. So you can capture all this great information. I hope, I'm sure you guys were all taking notes. So Kathy, we did get a few questions coming in to the chat, so maybe I will visit those first. Jeanette asked a question: are there any native shrubs that would make a good hedge to replace junipers? She's in need of something that is flammable that is not junipers. Do you have recommendations for her?
Yeah, there are actually several different options, and a lot of times people will use a mixture of things. Serviceberry, chokecherry, currant, a lot of those things are nice, but they have like a short flowering time, or They're attractive one time a year. So what I really like to do is mix all those things together. And then you have different flower colors, you have different flower times, you have different berries, you have a lot of different things going on. And I think that looks much more attractive than just having a plain evergreen hedge.
Nice. Thank you for the recommendation. At this time too, you're welcome to unmute yourself if you do have a question, or please use the reaction button to raise your hand. We do have a few questions that are in the chat, so we'll go ahead and ask those. But if somebody does choose to unmute themselves, we can call on you. Another question that came in, Jean asks, are there any hardy native ground covers that can stand up to heavy foot traffic?
That's a tough one. Most of the natives aren't used to heavy traffic. So unless you get into, maybe a grass or something that, but even a lot of the native grasses don't like that really heavy traffic. Kanikanik will take some traffic, but it's not something that you could regularly walk on like a yard type. There are some that can be lightly walked on, but as far as the natives, as far as replacing like a heavy use lawn or something, there's not really a good solution for that.
Callie asks, how do you know if you have a native hawthorn? It sounds like she has one in her front yard. Do you have any tips for recognizing that?
So one thing is the native hawthorn usually have those thorns, and a lot of the ones that have been bred, they bred the thorns out so that they don't have those great big thorns. So that's one of the reasons, or one of the easy ways to tell. Also, the native hawthorn usually has more of a multi-stemmed growth habit, and a lot of the ones that have, the cultivars or the different varieties are more of a single stem into a tree form.
Nice. Okay. Kelly asks, are there dwarf mountain ashberries? Are the dwarf mountain ashberries edible?
They aren't poisonous, but they're not tasty. They're kind of pulpy, and they're edible, but not tasty. The birds like them, but you don't see a lot of things that are made with the mountain ashberries.
Yeah, certain tastes or certain palate for those. Jacob asks, advice on natives that will compete well with invasive creepers like English ivy.
Well, English ivy is a tough one. One of the reasons that it has become a problem is because there is nothing really that competes too well with it, and it chokes things out. And that's one of the reasons that we strongly recommend planting natives versus some of these introduced things, because a lot of the things that are invasive in our landscape right now are things that people have used in landscapes in the past, because they grow well and they grow easy, but they grow too well and they take over. So it really, you probably will have to get rid of the English ivy and then have natives come in after. But as far as something competing with them, that would be tough.
Nice. Okay. Both Tammy and Sarah had some questions about soil. So shrubs that you might recommend with a heavy clay soil. And then with Palouse soils, draining with native plants, how that can, what's the ideal conditions maybe for native plants?
So a lot of the Palouse soils, if they're true nice Palouse topsoil, they actually drain pretty well. We're very lucky here. Our soils are, that true Palouse topsoil is good. It drains fairly well. Unless it's compacted, and that's one of the things that you have to be careful of, is especially when you're building a house, they bring in all that equipment and take your nice aerated Palouse topsoil and turn it into concrete. But consider that when you're talking to your contractor, have them try to disturb it and go over the least that they can. As far as clay soils, the ocean spray does well, the mock orange does well, some of those things, that the creeping Oregon grape. those things that I said did do well on those really poor soils. Those are some of the go-to things for there. As far as the Palouse soils, there's very few things that won't grow on the nice Palouse soil. That's why we're fortunate.
We are very lucky where we are. Yes, absolutely. Louise asked about pruning tips for mallow, nine bark, and blue elderberry.
So on both of those, what I like to do is prune back to the ground. A lot of people like to just shear off the top and then you get a lot of kind of wild sucker growth. I like to take more of those canes, like the older canes, take those back completely to the ground, and then you don't get that aggressive sucker growth when you prune it back. So, and actually elderberry, it kind of dies back too. And so when you cut back those old canes, it does rejuvenate it and grows from the ground. So it actually helps rejuvenate and keep that plant young. And nine bark is kind of the same way. If you chop back the older canes and let some of those newer ones take off, I think you have a lot better luck. A lot of people bring the head shears out, just shear everything back, and that really stimulates growth, but it stimulates it on the end of the branches. And if you prune it back deeper and take the older canes out, it stimulates growth, but from the base, and keeps it a lot nicer and fuller and more natural looking.
Nice, great. And with that, Robert had a question here about a large elderberry that's growing on his property. And if they do pruning there, can they transplant, take a transplant for that to grow another plant?
The elderberry is tough to do that with because it's a real caney growth, and a lot of the canes are just kind of hollow, so it doesn't root very well. If you can find an offshoot that is near it where you can, dig up like a sucker that has developed some root, you can transplant that way. But as far as cutting off a branch and trying to get it to root like a willow or a dogwood, it doesn't work very well.
Okay, good to know. And we had a few questions in here of folks probably living in town, but have a lot of, may not have the best full sun, by a sidewalk or a small yard. Are there plants that you would recommend for an area that might be shade tolerant or require not very much space?
Yeah, the wild ginger and the bunchberry are nice. And then we do have several wildflowers that of course, I didn't talk about the forbs and the wildflowers today, but there are several wildflowers that do well in that shady situation. Columbine is one. We have red columbine and blue columbine that both do well. Blue-eyed grass does good in the partial shade situations. Kittentails, we've got several different forbs that will do well in that partial shade.
Nice, great, yeah. And the questions are getting down here, but if you do have a question, feel free to put it in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself. We'll just ask a few more here of you, Kathy. So Donna had asked a question. She sounds like she has a lot of fir and cedar trees that are close to her home and looking for ground cover to go with that. Is there ones you'd recommend?
There are some ground covers that do well under trees. One of the problems that a lot of people have with having those big like fir trees growing in their front yard is the root system is right at the top of the soil. And part of that is because you try watering a lawn and you water it very shallow, and the root system develops very shallow instead of developing deeper like the natural tree would. And so it sucks all of that water out of the landscape. So it's not so much the soil, it's kind of a lack of soil because that root system is so massive in there, and also lack of water because it sucks up all that water. So a lot of times you have that shade and almost no soil. You can't even dig into the soil because of the root system and just that low water. So that makes it challenging. If it's a natural situation, you do have a lot of understory plants that grow in there. For instance, the ginger, the bunchberry, those things are trees or our ground covers that naturally go, and Kanikanik, even Oregon grape, all of those things grow as understory plants in a natural situation. But in a natural situation, you usually have that deep root system on the trees, and then you've got that really nice organic, rich understory soil. In the landscape, we've kind of lost that because of our watering habits for watering that lawn. And that's when you get those shallow root systems that kind of make it very difficult to get something established in there.
Nice. Okay. A few more questions here coming in. Jacob asks, I planted a diversity seed mix this year. Should he also be planting a native grass mix into that as well?
So one of the challenges with the grasses and the wildflowers and pollinators is a lot of the grasses will kind of choke out some of those wildflowers. What we usually recommend, Idaho Fescue works really well with planting when you're trying to get those wildflowers or pollinator species developed, because it's not real aggressive and it doesn't get real tall. It's a bunch grass, so it's not rhizomatous. And so what I recommend usually, and actually in some of our wildflower mixes, we even mix in that Idaho Fescue. So you can also do, there's a few other grasses if you wanted to mix in. We do have our Inland Northwest native grass mix, but it gets a little taller and it has some rhizomatous species in there. So I wouldn't recommend mixing that if you're trying to get the pollinator species and the wildflowers, more probably towards that Idaho Fescue.
Nice. Okay. A lot of really great questions here, Kathy, and I'm sure we could keep you on here all night. We got a bunch too from folks at the beginning, so unfortunately we're not going to be able to get to all those tonight, but Kathy has expressed that she's more than welcome to continue to answer your questions through her email. So we'll post that on our website. But final question here from Sean. Any recommendations on promoting sedges and rushes in riparian or wetland areas? This is a place close to our heart in the Palouse. Or plants that do well in these saturated areas besides the typical cottonwood or shrub plantings?
Yeah, and we work a lot with that. We work a lot with the Palouse Conservation District on that, and actually a lot of riparian systems. And yeah, there's lots of different options as far as the sedges and rushes and bulrushes. Most of them, it's dependent on water level and what kind of dry down you have. And so if you let me know kind of the situation that you're working with, I can recommend some species. We also have a native wetland grass mix that is another kind of 5 species mix. It works better on the kind of on the shoreline where it's not inundated all the time. It can take some inundation and some flooding. But it also can take dry down. So it's kind of nice on those bank situations. And then we have the other, sedges, rushes, bulrushes that will take, up to deep water. So lots of different situations. And then of course, you've got all your willows and dogwoods, and really there's many, many different species that you can use to do the riparian. We're actually, one of the things that we're doing as far as landscaping is we work with a lot of landscape companies, and it used to be that the swales were all planted with turf grass and mown, and now they're getting away from that and they're planting sedges and rushes and having it be more of a natural situation, which is much healthier and I think more attractive.
That's great to hear. That'll be fun to see across the landscape. That's great. Well, thank you again, Kathy, for your time this evening and you sharing your expertise with all of us. We so greatly appreciate it.